Like my last record, All I Intended to Be, there were a lot of tunes that I'd kind of meant to cover over the years that I hadn't gotten around to. And also,
she's been called the voice of grace in country music, a queen of harmony, a bridge between generations, genres, and hearts. For decades, Emmylou Harris has been the soft answer to the loud industry, humble, spiritual, resilient. But even grace has a boundary. And now, with nothing left to prove and no need to please, Emmylou is finally speaking out. She's naming names. 5 of them. 5 musicians who, behind the scenes, crossed her personal red line, not through scandal, but through arrogance, betrayal, and a total disregard for the spirit of the music she's lived by. This isn't rage. It's a reckoning from a woman who has stayed quiet for far too long. But the sting of betrayal isn't limited to the new generation. Sometimes it cuts deeper when it comes from legends you once held above the rest. That's what happened with Van Morrison. Their joint tour in the early 2000s had the glow of something sacred. On stage, it felt like stardust. 2 icons weaving sound into something fans would call magical. But magic, as Emmylou learned, doesn't always survive the dressing room. Off stage, Morrison was distant, curt. His presence didn't just cool the room, it chilled it. He made her feel small in subtle ways, from the way he avoided eye contact to the way he dismissed her sound as too sweet for real blues, not as a joke, not as critique, just cold dismissal. The very thing fans adored about her, he shrugged off like it was sugar on the floor. Emmylou, always more about grace than confrontation, stayed quiet. But inside, she withered. The final blow wasn't public, it was private. Morrison snapped at a young sound tech for letting her solo rise too loud in the mix. It wasn't just rudeness, it was control, a warning. That night, Emmylou packed her bag. She finished the tour out of duty, but not a single word passed between them again. Not backstage, not years later, not ever. It wasn't anger that stayed with her, it was disappointment. She had hoped that in another legend, she'd find kinship. Instead, she found cold stone. And just when she thought she had learned how to live with that kind of cold, she found a colder silence waiting around the corner. That someone was Neil Young. Their collaboration was meant to be intimate, just one song in a room heavy with history. Emmylou arrived ready, with harmonies sketched in a dog-eared notebook. She offered her voice, soft and steady, expecting creative communion. But Neil wasn't listening. "Just let me do my thing," he said, barely looking up. The words weren't sharp, but the coldness in them cut deeper. So she stepped back, recorded her part in silence, and left.
basically it was up to Daniel Lanois and I to come up with material, and he was suggesting things. And I of course, in the last...
Weeks later, she learned he'd replaced her voice with another that mimicked hers, so precisely it felt like a shadow. There was no call, no explanation, just silence. It wasn't the act that hurt most. It was the erasure, like she had never been there at all. For someone who had built her life on harmony, the quiet rejection felt brutal. Betrayal doesn't always explode. Sometimes it fades into silence that lingers like smoke. And for Emmylou, that silence spoke of lost trust, of one more illusion shattered on a road she thought they walked together. That was the heartbreak with Lucinda Williams. They should have been allies. Two women with grit. Two survivors in a business that never made space for softness unless it was broken or obedient. Emmylou admired Lucinda's edge, her poetry, her defiance, her refusal to be packaged. In Lucinda, she saw not a rival but a reflection. Rough-hewn beauty, scarred but unshaken. So when Emmylou suggested a duet for a benefit album, something raw and stripped back, voices blending in harmony for a cause that mattered, she expected at least consideration, respect, maybe even excitement. Instead, Lucinda laughed. "I don't do angel stuff." The words were tossed off like a joke, but they cut deep. To Emmylou, it wasn't just a dismissal of a song, It was a dismissal of everything she stood for, of her sound, her spirit, her sincerity. Emmylou believed in bridges. Lucinda lit matches. Where Emmylou reached out, Lucinda stepped back. And that distance wasn't artistic. It was personal. It reminded Emmylou that not every woman in the industry wanted unity. Some wanted to draw lines. She never confronted her, never wrote back, but she never forgot. Because when a woman you admire shrinks you into a stereotype, the wound doesn't bleed. It burns, and it changes you. And then came the one name she never thought she'd have to say. A name that once stood for kinship, for kindred values, for quiet strength. But now, the name didn't bring comfort. It brought a chill, a quiet ache where there had once been harmony. Willie Nelson. They shared stages, stories, songs, laughter over tour bus coffee, long, soulful silences between ballads that said more than words ever could. In Willie, Emmylou didn't just see a collaborator. She saw a kindred soul, a gentle outlaw, a man whose moral compass, like hers, pointed toward truth, not trend. They were aligned, or so she believed. From Vietnam protest ballads to gospel harmonies whispered into southern night skies, their connection felt anchored in something sacred. So when Emmylou took a stand against a corporate-backed deal that turned veterans' tribute concerts into cash cows, war stories into ad slots, she assumed he'd stand with her. She didn't ask for a public statement. She didn't want a song. She just hoped for silence, for absence, for shared conviction. Instead, he performed. She called. He didn't answer. She wrote. He didn't reply. No explanation, no softening word. The man whose voice had once wrapped around hers like aged oak was gone. It was disappearance. And that silence, it wasn't quiet. It roared. It echoed through her, past the memories, past the harmonies, into something deeper. This wasn't about music. This was about trust, about believing someone saw the world as you did, and learning, in the harshest way, that maybe they never did. It shook her. Because betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a no-show, a missing voice in a moment that matters. And for Emmylou, who spent her life making music that meant something, Willie's silence wasn't neutral. It was noise, the kind that keeps you up at night. And that was a heartbreak she couldn't sing through, only carry. Then came the one who was once a promise, a spark of brilliance and ruin she tried to guide. That friend was Ryan Adams. They met backstage at a tribute concert. Emmylou in her timeless calm, Ryan in a cloud of nervous energy and guitar feedback. He was younger, volatile, and burning with the kind of brilliance that often consumes itself. But Emmylou saw the soul beneath the fire, the potential beneath the chaos. And she did what she always did with troubled genius. She extended grace. She tried to mentor him, offered quiet wisdom where others gave him stage lights and leeway. She spoke of honesty, of finding truth in a lyric, not just shock value. But Ryan didn't want wisdom. He wanted worship, and when she gently stepped back, when she declined to record with him because the lyrics felt hollow, performative, he didn't ask why. He retaliated. Not with confrontation, but with mockery. In interviews, he called her work soft, angelic to a fault, irrelevant. And then came the worst blow. A lyric in a song clearly aimed at her. It was bitter, cynical, and unmistakably personal. Everyone in her circle knew, and Emmylou, who had always believed music was a form of communion, was left staring at the cost of trying to love a storm. She didn't respond. Not in the press, not in lyrics, not even in whispers. But she carried the weight. Because it's one thing to be bruised by a legend, it's another to be wounded by someone you tried to lift, someone you tried to steady. That's when she walked away, not from music, but from the illusion that sincerity is contagious, from the hope that if you give your heart to this industry, someone younger might carry it with care. She learned instead, some hearts aren't ready to hold anything but their own fire, and some wounds don't heal, they simply teach you how to close the door more gently next time. Emmylou Harris is still the woman who sang for Graham Parsons and carried his legacy when no one else would. She's still the ethereal harmony behind 100 records, the voice that could break your heart without ever raising its volume. But now, that voice carries something else: resolve. Because this isn't just a list of names, it's a reckoning, a quiet storm unleashed after years of holding the line. These weren't just professional slights. They were emotional fractures, moments that changed how she saw people she once admired, trusted, or loved. They tried to shrink her, some with condescension, others with silence, and for a long time she took it. She thought dignity meant endurance, but now she knows dignity can also mean walking away. She's not bitter. She's clear. She's not angry. She's awake. This isn't a list of enemies. It's a list of heartbreaks, some loud, some quiet, all unforgettable. And Emmylou, the woman who once made country music feel like church, is no longer singing hymns for those who never understood the sanctity of the song. She's closing the doors with grace. But make no mistake, they're closing for good.